Today, I wanted to talk about how we can make exercise more fun. So whether we're an individual who's not really enjoying exercise and wants to do more of it by making it more fun, or if we're a gym owner or a coach who wants to get more client retention and helping our clients come back and make exercise a habit, well, we want to make those classes as fun as possible too. We know obviously that fun feels good, but it seems to be this sort of ethereal, magical cocktail of things that somehow make an experience fun. And so the objective of this podcast is to really break down what the experience of fun is, what's going on neurologically in the brain, and also why we experience fun by looking at our activities that create the experience of fun through an evolutionary lens. I think of fun through two perspectives. So psychologists will tell you that fun comes in doses. Now, DOSE, D-O-S-E, is an acronym for dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphin. Right? Those are all neurochemicals in the brain that create different feelings, and they're created in different circumstances. You've probably all heard of the neurochemical dopamine, the pleasure chemical. And because we need our brain to release dopamine in order for us to feel good, you can think of all of these other neurochemicals like serotonin, endorphin, and oxytocin to be in some way connected to dopamine. So it's not just whenever these neurochemicals are released by the brain on their own, but it's when they're released in conjunction with dopamine that an experience can be fun. So that's the neurochemical side. Now, on the other side, we can think of our brain releasing those neurochemicals whenever we mimic a behavior that was once beneficial to our survival. It's a little bit trickier to pin down, but let's start off with some obvious examples. So one way we know to make exercise more fun is to exercise in a group. Let's think about why that is. First of all, from the neurochemical side, and then why we produce those neurochemicals. So the first one is that when we function as a group, we release the rewarding us hormone or love hormone, which is oxytocin. We have this warm and fuzzy feeling of connectedness. When we're all doing the same activity, working together with a common goal, that's been a very successful survival strategy for our ancestors for millions of years. And so therefore our nervous system rewards us with oxytocin. Now, evolution doesn't really have agency in that sense, but we can think of evolution as the great optimizer. So we can think of survival of the fittest. Well, those animals that didn't get a rewarding experience when they worked in a group, well, they were less inclined to work in a group, and therefore they were less successful at finding mates, fighting off predators, finding resources like space and food, and they died off. So we can think of evolution as filtering through these qualities over time that make individuals who do work as a group, then they're more successful. Right, so that's how the mechanism works for evolution, filtering out individuals that don't experience rewarding neurochemicals to the ones that do whenever they mimic certain behaviors that were once beneficial or long been beneficial to our survival. And there are plenty of studies that show that we seem to enjoy training together as a group than training alone. A 2018 study by the University of Toronto compared students who took part in team sports and those who exercised alone. And they found that the ones who exercised in groups, whether in CrossFit or yoga or jiu-jitsu, or in team sports like football, hockey, basketball, whatever it might be, they tend to exercise twice as much as those who exercise alone. And another study on rowers showed that when rowers were rowing in synchrony, they released 15% more endorphins than when they were just rowing by themselves. So it seems that this group activity really is rewarded with pleasure-giving neurochemicals. So another example of that is that we're naturally competitive, or we can be competitive, when we're exercising in a group. Now, the hormone responsible for that is serotonin. And the mechanism, well, we've also had to be competitive for our survival. If a group of individuals were all moving rapidly and exerting energy around us during our entire evolutionary history, then that meant that there was some sort of competition going on for mates, resources like food, and so on. And so to lose out would have been detrimental to our survival or the replication and propagation of our DNA, which is the main goal of evolution. So serotonin is for competence, but that's why if we feel like we're good at something, if we feel competent or proficient in an activity, then it's going to feel more fun. So as a coach or as an individual, it's really important to seek guidance from a peer or a coach to guide us through the movement so that we can become proficient. Because if we're not proficient, we feel like we're incompetent, we feel like we're falling down a competence hierarchy amongst our peers, and our nervous system says that's really terrible for our survival. We have a reuptake of serotonin and dopamine. It's not a nice feeling. We don't enjoy the workout or the exercise class, and then we don't want to go back. Conversely, as we become more competent, we're going to have more of a serotonin and dopamine release, and therefore it's going to be more rewarding. That's quite a convincing mechanism. We can make exercise more fun by working in a group, and that's the evolutionary and neurochemical explanations. Oxytocin, serotonin, either competitiveness or coordination or coordinating as a group. So let's go into some more not so debatable other examples. So humans are cursorial mammals. And a cursorial mammal is a mammal that had to run continuously for its survival. So dogs are also cursorial mammals. Mice are cursorial mammals. And cursorial mammals release an endocannabinoid, so it's from the same neural pathway that's connected to cannabis, and it's associated with feelings of joy and elation and serenity. And that's the neurochemical anandamide. So whenever we go for sustained runs or do endurance exercises that mimic the physiological demands of running, like cycling or skipping or so on, or maybe rowing, then we also release anandamide, and it's what we call the bliss molecule, and it's probably associated with runner's high, that elated feeling that we get when we do these activities during a sustained amount of time. So what I do in my workouts with my class is I will always, especially with new clients, not always, but generally I try and put in a bit of cardio that's going to release anandamide. Now at the time, especially for new clients, they're like, I don't want to expend all this energy. This isn't going to feel good. Yet somehow something happens that makes them want to come back to the class. And part of that is that little release of anandamide that they get from that sustained endurance at the end of the class. And suddenly they're thinking, oh shit, I want more of this. Okay, so anandamide is the neurochemical. We had to run for our survival. So humans had to run for our survival. We have sweat glands, which allow us to outrun a horse. The way we actually hunted large game was to continuously just outrun them. We would just see a deer or an antelope or whatever it might have been. We could track their footprints in the sand or the ground, and then we could just keep chasing them. The animal would get tired, and eventually we'd have this lame deer in front of us, and we could hunt it. So there's lots of evidence on this that we're the running mammal. Sustained running, we'd get the whole family. Evidence that shows that we had about the same endurance capacity from when we were the age of 15 to the age of 50. And that's because the whole family would have to follow behind the tribe to make sure that we didn't let the meat rot before we got to it. If the hunters at the head of the pack killed an animal, they couldn't drag it back 50 kilometers or 100 kilometers to the tribe. It would rot in the heat of the savannah. So the whole family would run behind. And so because running was so central to our survival, the filter of evolution has meant that we produce a rewarding neurochemical, anandamide, whenever we run or mimic running. Okay. Next one is lots of activities that are fun are like boxing or wrestling or jiu-jitsu or sparring. Now, why is that? Well, it seems really obvious. Whenever we so battle was super important. We're mimicking a behavior. We're mimicking fighting off a predator or fighting off a competitor. And when we're mimicking that, it's like, well, that's super important training for our survival. Our nervous system is going to reward us with endorphins and dopamine. And that's actually probably the reason why we laugh when we tickle. So the scientist Jaak Panksepp found that if you tickle rats, they laugh as well, and it shows that there's this play circuit in all mammals. And we know from watching National Geographic Channel that all young mammals through adolescence, they play fight to develop these skills. But it's fun for them too. It's not just fun for us, it's also fun for lesser mammals like rats. And we see it with lions and bears and dogs and so on. And think that it's actually areas that we need to defend where we get tickled. So if it's our neck, this is obviously an area where there's arteries and so on, which we need to protect, and it's our rib cage that when we get tickled on it, we need to protect it. And that's so that it can be, we can learn to protect ourselves in a rewarding way. It's not a threatening environment, it's a fun environment, which is why we laugh. Some people, however, this is a good point here, some people don't enjoy tickling because suddenly they don't see that they're getting to mimic behavior or a life or death situation in a safe space. Their nervous system can't dissociate between play and a real threat. And so the idea of someone touching their neck is really, really, really uncomfortable for them. So it's really important that we dissociate the fear mechanism for something to be enjoyable. And this also applies to some other examples like climbing, which we'll get into in a second. I should note at this point that, of course, team sports tend to follow the same pattern of we're either mimicking chasing prey or running from a predator. And of course that activates our fight or flight response, our sympathetic nervous system, which means we produce adrenaline and endorphin. Now, of course, adrenaline is actually synthesized from dopamine, so we can't get that adrenaline rush without having that positive pleasure feeling from the dopamine beforehand. But anyone who can't dissociate the game from real threats, well, they're not going to have an enjoyable experience because of the fear factor. So whenever we have rough and tumble play, we produce adrenaline, endorphin, which is the self-produced morphine, which numbs both physical and emotional pain. So it's going to feel good whenever we're play fighting, and yeah, just activating our sympathetic nervous system in a safe environment. Now, slightly more debatable areas in the nitty-gritty. So I've said that we release rewarding neurochemicals that make an exercise or an activity fun whenever we mimic a behavior that was once beneficial or long beneficial to our survival. Now, that isn't concrete science, it's more of a evolutionary theory, but it stands on good ground. But these last two examples are slightly more in the nitty-gritty of hypotheses as opposed to fact. But I'll let you decide if you agree. So the first one is throwing. Throwing seems to be inherently fun. And sports really show this. It's like we seem to really enjoy basketball and baseball and, things that mimic us launching a projectile, which could also be football and so on. We really do enjoy throwing, and I know that myself with my cousin, we can just sit and throw rocks at a tree for hours, and it's just innately enjoyable. It's like, well, why is that? Well, it seems that humans and our predecessors, Homo erectus, evolved a different physiology so that we could hunt down prey in big groups. So we're not as strong as other primates, but what we could do is we could coordinate in groups, and then we could take down large game, large prey from a safe distance. And we did that by throwing projectiles, either stones or spears. And we do that in large groups, and we just throw and throw and throw until, well, we took the animal out, made it lame, and then we could get close and maybe stab it with a dagger in its throat. Gory. So the evolutionary adaptations where we have a wider set of hips, our shoulders are lower on our torso, so we can generate power from our base into our arms, and we also have a twisting humerus, So this is the humerus, is this bone in the upper arm here. We can twist that with our shoulder. And we also have this unique capacity to store loads of energy in the tendons and ligaments in our shoulder, which allow us to, we can throw, a 5-year-old girl can throw better than a silverback gorilla because they don't have this physiology. So we've developed the physiology for throwing. We know that we use throwing for survival, and it seems that from sports, throwing is innately fun. Well, my reckoning is you put those two together, and whenever we add throwing, so with my clients, I'll often throw medicine balls or back and forth with underarm throws, overhand throws, and I'll throw that into workouts because for some reason it's innately fun. So if you want to have more fun, put in the throwing, or maybe a throwing game with a hacky sack or a small tennis ball before a class. That's going to make it more enjoyable as well. And the final nitty-gritty example that's not quite conclusive is climbing. Now obviously we descended from the trees several 100,000 years ago, but our ancestors were our tree-swinging arboreal primates, swinging through the trees. And it seems that when we climb, what we know from studies of climbers, that climbers release dopamine. Now maybe this is to do with the fact that they're in a harness, but they're also experiencing vertigo. So it's that fear or mechanism in a safe environment. So the prefrontal cortex knows we're safe, we're not going to fall, and that can make it fun because it gets the adrenaline going. But it might also just be that when we're hanging from a bar or a set of rings, we're mimicking a behavior that was long beneficial to our survival, and therefore we release these rewarding neurochemicals. Dopamine is released saying you're doing activity that's going to benefit your survival, help you succeed as a species and as a group, and therefore it makes it more fun. So I like to throw in bar work. It's great for the shoulders, great for posture and upper body strength, but that's not the reason it's fun. The reason it's fun is because it mimics behavior that was once beneficial to our survival. So I think once you frame it this way, you're going to be able to have more enjoyable workouts. If you're a coach, you're going to be able to make more enjoyable workouts, and everyone can have more fun when they're exercising. Yeah, and I hope you found this podcast useful. If you like this video and want to learn more about what actually makes us exercise, then please like and subscribe.